All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for October's Innovation Lab. It is just 12 o'clock now, so we will wait about 1 minute or so for folks to join us. We do see some attendees rolling in still, so we will give it about a minute or two. Just as a reminder, today's presentation explores how we can prepare for a future with warmer temperatures. And as usual, these innovation labs are pretty much always interactive or are always interactive through the use of Menti. So if you have a moment now, you're welcome to log in at www.menti.com and we'll provide you with the 6-digit login code once we get started and encounter the first question. All right, I do see the attendee numbers still climbing, so I will continue to give this about another minute. But as noted, feel free to join now on www.menti.com, get set up. All right, so we'll get started. I'd firstly like to thank you all for joining us, whether you're a regular attendee at our Innovation Labs or it's your first time participating, we're happy to have you join us. This month's session explores how we can prepare for a future with warmer temperatures. And this Innovation Lab, as usual, is interactive through Menti, so please take a moment to sign in at www.menti.com, and we'll provide the login code once we get rolling. And these webinars are hosted across the country and across the business, and they're interestingly tied to a theme rather than a particular service or product. So we're happy to have you join us. All right, and these are hosted by Future Ready, which is our innovation program here at WSP. And Future Ready looks to see the future more clearly and design for it today. And when we say that, we mean we see the future more clearly through reviewing and considering key trends that anticipate future conditions, and then aim to design for it today by responding to these anticipated futures in the way we deliver our solutions, our projects, and our designs. And this should advance our solutions and really provide value to our communities and the people who use our designs and our services. So by working in alignment with these pillars, we hope that we lead the way in innovation, and through our work, really our careful consideration of future trends and solutions and what we can now consider to be our future-ready approach, we hope to be at the top of the market, delivering the most innovative designs. So within Canada, there are currently 3 of us working within the Future Ready program. Many of you likely know Claire Hicks, as well as Anna Roback, who Claire is our Future Ready program manager, and Anna is the Future Ready research manager, both of whom have hosted innovation labs previously. And I'm Jamie. I'm new to WSP and Future Ready within the last 6 months, and I'm a program consultant with Future Ready, and I will be hosting today's webinar or Innovation Lab. And we've listed our emails here with the hope that you can reach out to us if you have any questions about either the Innovation Labs or anything else related to future trends or Future Ready as a program and what it means for you and your work, and again, those communities that use our services. So as I did note quickly, these innovation labs are designed to support collaboration and idea sharing across the entire business. They do explore a trend rather than a specific service line or project. And they really are our key platform for us to explore trends shaping our future, as well as the solutions and designs to address those trends today. As noted again, they are webinars that are designed to be interactive through the use of Menti. So please log in and contribute your feedback to the questions. And as also, you're welcome to contribute questions of your own at the end that we can propose to all of our panelists. So to launch off our Menti interaction, our first question is really taking stock of the business lines represented in our audience today. So please log in at menti.com and use the 6-digit code at the top. It's 789475. And let us know what business line you're joining us from today. Fantastic. We see lots of folks from environment, infrastructure, some rolling in from transportation, buildings, shared services, ERI. I'll just give it a little longer because I do see numbers climbing. All right, well, it's fantastic to have all of you joining us. A nice representation from across the business and I'm sure across the country, so thank you very much. So to dive into the content of today's Innovation Lab and session, we'll be speaking about how we can prepare for a future with warmer temperatures. And we will be exploring what future conditions will look like in terms of heat, the potential impacts of those heat on our lives, and the design solutions that we can explore to cope with that kind of temperature rise. So as most people do know, global air temperatures are really increasing because increased concentrations of greenhouse gases are trapping excess heat in Earth's atmosphere. So this graph at the top shows the recent history, so going back in time, looking at temperature increases in Canada back to 1948, and it shows an increase of about 1.7 degrees Celsius over that time frame. Conversely, the map on the left side shows the projected, so the anticipated changes that we are expecting to see in temperature, annual temperature measure by the end of the 21st century across Canada, which is under a high, but a likely emission scenario. So we do see increases going up to nearly 10 degrees Celsius in some places. Some numbers and facts to accompany those graphics show that average temperature in Canada has already increased at about double the global rate. In Canadian Arctic, so Canada's north, the rates are actually higher, anticipated to be about 3 times as much. And these increases are, as we've seen, they are happening now, but they are expected to continue into the future. So average temperature in Canada is expected by 2100 to be 6.3 degrees Celsius rather than 1.8, with of course regional and seasonal differences across the entire country. So these warmer temperatures, as you can imagine, they don't simply mean that we're going to be warmer and hotter. There's a full suite of cascading and interacting effects that are caused by these warmer temperatures, including things such as heat waves, so concentrations or isolated warmer extreme events. And these lead to threats in human health, as well as an increased demand for air conditioning and cooling systems. With this, we also expect larger and longer spreads of disease vectors and pests, increasing in their range and their persistence throughout the year, increased risk of wildfires or forest fires, which can be caused by warmer conditions, as well as increased incidence of lightning, which has been shown to increase with climate change. The hydrological cycle is something that we will be speaking about in this presentation further. Our panelists will be sharing some information about changes to water, and that can be increase in floods as well as decrease in water levels, leading to things like droughts. So there are some significant impacts on hydrological cycles as temperatures rise. And we also do encounter lots of safety concerns as well as infrastructure damage as warmer temperatures lead to things like ice cover reductions and permafrost degradation in areas of Canada's north where permafrost is a reality. So we would like to hear from you now in our second Menti question. And given that we are broadcasting this webinar to a diverse group across the country, we'd like to know what kind of varied impacts you anticipate will affect you the most. So please return to Menti.com and let us know how you expect these warmer temperatures will affect you the most. All right, as anticipated, we are seeing a spread of effects, and that makes sense given the complexity of the issue. You don't seem to have too many avid ice fishers in the audience, not so concerned about ice cover. Well, as we move through our presentations today, we are looking forward to hearing more about how these temperatures will rise and how they will affect us, as well as what we can do to be both proactive and innovative in our solutions. So today's innovators, or our presenters today, will be joining us from across the business as mentioned. We have Anna Ristic and Jan Chavillet joining us from our Montreal office, and as well as Kitchener, and they are climate change specialists from the Ecology and EIA group, and they will be sharing a bit about how we forecast heat and use that understanding in environmental impact assessments. Our presenter following Anna and Jan will be Anthony Paleschi, who is an energy performance specialist in sustainability and energy, and he will be discussing how we prepare buildings for these rising temperatures from both an adaptation as well as a mitigation perspective. And finally, we will have a summary presentation given by myself on behalf of Francois Groux, who's a fluvial hydraulic specialist in the energy or the hydro service line. And Francois will be touching on the cascading effects of warmer temperatures on those hydrological cycles and how we can alter our designs in response. So to hand over to our first presenters, Anna and Jan, excuse me, I will pass over control and you should be good to go.
So hello everyone. I'm just trying to change the slide. Okay. Okay, nice, great. So hello, hello everyone. So Anna Ristic and myself are part, as Jamie said, of the little climate change team in the WSP, and we'll present you how we integrate heat impacts in our environmental impact studies, our climate assessments, and our adaptation plans.
So just for a quick overview, we're part of the climate change team, and this is just a snapshot of the projects we've done over the last year and a half, 2 years. And we just wanted to show the diversity of conditions we face in Canada. So we've done work all the way from considering permafrost in the Yukon to how melting ice is going to affect erosion rates all the way in PEI. And this is projects done on everything from small berms to greater wastewater treatment plants and water treatment plants. So we do get to apply how heat will affect to a variety of scenarios, which is pretty cool. So heat in the land of hockey. Heat is not traditionally the first thing you think of when you think Canadian weather. We have a reputation for being cold and miserable, a lot of snow. I have European relatives, and when they came to visit in the summer, they asked if they should bring their parkas with them, and I said only if you want to die. And the way we even view climate change within the country is not the same for everyone. It's affected by everything from what your hobbies are, your education, your income level, your moral view of the environment, as well as just what shelter you have. So everyone sees it differently, but the reality is, as Claire mentioned, that as Jamie mentioned, is that Canada is the fastest warming country in the world. So when we do these projects, we really do have two priorities: is one, to help them adapt to heat, and two, to actually raise awareness that this is happening in this country.
So actually, here is related to that your first Menti question for our presentation. So grab your phones and try to answer the following question. So Ottawa experiences on average today 2 heat waves per year. So how many do you think the city is projected to get more by the end of this century?
I like the fatalistic approach of people who think it's going to be a never-ending heat wave.
Yeah. Okay, very interesting. So I'll let you a little bit more time to answer. Okay, great. So actually, most of you are actually right, because the answer is actually 5 more. By the end of the century, Ottawa will experience 7 heat waves each year on an average. And interesting fact, heat wave will also last longer. Currently, they last on average 3.5 days, and by the end of the century, they are likely to last 8 days on average.
So Ottawa can be both miserable in the winter and the summer.
Yeah, exactly.
So how does heat impact any project? So I'm gonna give you a fairly high level overview. We try to look at it very holistically. So of course we consider the physical impacts to buildings and infrastructure, how will it affect the degradation rate or the materials, but we also consider it through how is it going to affect the budget of the project? Will you need to spend more on air conditioning? Will you need to spend more on maintenance rates? Is it going to impact the environment around the project? Is the grass, the landscaping you had planned going to be more susceptible to heat or vectors that come in? Are there any legal repercussions if your building isn't designed to that new level of heat? Health and safety is quite a big one. So in older buildings, especially if you don't have air conditioning, things like that, is that going to be a problem on your workers or anyone who comes to visit? And finally, is it going to harm the reputation or the economy of your project? So for example, we're doing quite a large risk assessment on a number of retail buildings. So if those aren't air conditioned properly, or even if they're too air conditioned, things like that, that'll affect the reputation and whether you want to go eventually, which might affect the bottom line.
So, oh, sorry. So actually, how can we know how hot is too hot and for which kind of infrastructure? So to do that, we must answer 3 questions. The first one is actually where, because the tolerance to heat will be location specific. For instance, someone in Montreal will tolerate a temperature of 30 degrees much more easily than someone in Yellowknife, for instance. The second question is actually who. So who is the target population? It will depend if it's the agencies, the workers, the families, the kids, etc., etc. And the third question is actually what, because the type of infrastructure we are looking at will modify the thresholds of heat. So like the threshold will be different if we are looking at a building, a bridge, a wharf, etc., etc.
So given this, how do we actually decide how hot is too hot? And there isn't really one answer for every specific project. We'll first look at if there's any government or engineering standards in place, for example, building codes, health codes, things like that. We do talk to subject matter experts within WSP. So we do say, if it's going to be an extra like we mentioned, 3.5 days of heat waves per summer per year. Is this going to impact the wharf? Is this going to impact the durability of the pavement or any of the structures? We also look at academic research, and one of my personal favorites, the best source of information, I think, are historical events. What happened the last time it hit 45 degrees in this location? Were there any problems? And a fun fact that makes our job so much easier is that there's actually no standard definition of a heat wave in Canada. It depends on where you are, and it even depends on the governing body. So, for example, according to the Red Cross, in Southern Ontario, in order for it to be called a heat wave, it has to be over 42 degrees Celsius with the humidex for 3 days. But if you're in Labrador, it only has to hit 40 degrees Celsius for an hour. So quite a difference. So this is a project, just to give a quick example of how we do this, that we're actually working on right now. We're doing a climate change adaptation plan for the city of Coquitlam. And for those who are unfamiliar, Coquitlam is part of Metro Vancouver in BC. It's got about 140,000 people and is a pretty diverse area in terms of its landscape. So it's it's on the northern part of the Fraser River. And it's got a mix of dense forests, rural areas, urban areas, and the city is slowly building up towards the mountains on the northeastern side. And as you can see, the projections show that across the board, heat is projected to increase by the end of the century. And I want to bring everyone's attention to the second last line, very hot days. So there's a projected increase of very hot days, which is days over 30 degrees Celsius of 15. Currently, they get on average 1 day over 30 degrees Celsius per year. So that's a pretty big jump for them, especially for their population. So with this in mind, for the next slide. How do you think, this is our second Menti question, how do you think heat will affect the city of Coquitlam? So anything that jumps to your mind, if you think it's going to cause construction delays or problems to the buildings, anything like that. Ooh, go big or go home, I like it.
More ice cream sales.
That's actually true. That's. All right, perfect. I think the minute is up. So these are really great and a lot of the things we thought of. This is just a snapshot. I picked some random risks and hazards just to show you the diversity. So as someone mentioned, yeah, it changes public behavior. So just in terms of something that we might consider decreased use of public transit, studies show that people tend to, if they have private vehicles, they'll use them more when it's really, really warm. Yeah, delays in construction season, that's both for the comfort of the workers as well as legal. Depending on the area across Canada, there's a limit to how hot it's allowed to be for outdoor workers. A reduction in air quality, the hotter it is, the more smog days you tend to get. And everything, we didn't quite find total ecosystem collapse, but there is a risk of northern cedar tree death in Coquitlam. They've already seen it. They're very sensitive to temperature. An increased risk of disease vectors moving up north. Anyone in BC will know about the mountain pine beetle coming in, and a pretty significant increase in fire risk, especially for an area like Coquitlam, which is situated next to quite dense forests, and there's a lot of urban wildfire interface. So that was really great, and I look forward to integrating your suggestions into our project. So where we are right now in this project is we're currently helping the client develop adaptation options for the city. So just in terms of this process with heat, we're going to start by selecting adaptation options, and that's everything from something temporary, which would involve, for example, just having heat wave alerts or opening more cooling shelters, to strategic in terms of where you put your buildings, what kind of buildings you have to update your codes, things like that. And then we're going to help them filter and prioritize. There's about 9 or 10 criteria there. To be honest, it does tend to go around the cost and the political and citizen legitimacy. Is this something that they're going to use? Is it something that's going to be accepted? And then lastly, we'll help them with an implementation schedule and timeline. Some things can be done very quickly, very cheaply. So for example, public education is a really big one, telling people to stay inside when it gets really warm. When it gets really warm, making sure everyone knows to drink water, where some longer scale things, those strategic initiatives, buildings tend to take a little bit longer.
So long story short, we face in our work three main challenges to integrate heat in our work. So the first one is the fact that the level of detail is difficult to scope. To what extent we should assess the consequences of the temperature rise is not really easy. Second, heat is not really considered as a priority. In Canada, we have river flooding, permafrost thawing, freezing rain that are kind of more important for the population, although it's interesting to note that all these hazards are kind of linked to temperature rise. And finally, heat is a subtle indicator. It is not actually really seen as a real threat by people. It's the same that it's like the fact that by the time you feel thirsty, you may already have lost 2% of your water, and it's already too late. So it's kind of the same with the global temperature increase. And related to that, here is our third Menti question. So how much does the temperature need to increase for it to be a problem for society, infrastructure, and environments in Canada in general? Funny. So we can see that a lot of people think it's already a problem. And luckily for us, no one is thinking, oh, one is thinking it will never be a problem. Interesting. So I think the minute is almost up. So the answer is, as most of you answer, is actually it's already a problem here, and we already are seeing the impacts in our work in every project that we are working on. Go to the next slide. Yeah, it's already a problem. Yeah.
So to conclude our presentation, heat is really impacting our societies, our infrastructure, and our environment, but it is often quite underestimated by our clients. But there have been an increasing number of RFPs requesting a risk assessment on these sort of things and explicitly mentioning heat. So it's a promising new sector for us, and there's a lot of new opportunities there.
Yeah, and we'd be happy to know if you already incorporate temperature increase as a parameter in your work, and if you have any ideas for new projects, feel free to contact us. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, thank you, Anna and Yan. That was a fantastic presentation, bringing, as our temperatures decline for the season, bringing the general increasing trend to the forefront. It's important. Next up, we will be hearing from Anthony Peleschi on how we prepare buildings to both adapt to and mitigate against these climbing temperatures. So Anthony, I will pass control over to you.
Thanks. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I didn't book a meeting room, so there may be occasional background noise, but hopefully most people are pretty quiet in my pod, so it should be good. Thanks, everybody. I'm from the Sustainability and Energy Group, and there's a lot that I can say, and actually what's really cool is how Anna and Yan's presentation at a municipal level interfaces with a lot of the projects we do. Either we support municipalities for broader sustainability planning, or organizations like the hospital, Niagara Health, that I'm going to talk about as a sort of case study. I am trying to click on the screen. Oh, there we go. Awesome. Okay. Hopefully it doesn't jump too far ahead. So the kinds of projects that we do, and my goal is to kind of walk through this with you. And there's a lot that condensing about 300 slides down that we prepared for this organization into just 10 minutes is fun. So what we do is we typically get our clients to ask us this. Okay, here are our sustainability guiding principles, and we want you to help us develop a plan to align sustainability with our broader goals. And this is for a new hospital that they're building in Niagara. You can see here that climate change or greenhouse gas emissions is a priority area. They also have identified these other focus areas that they want to address that they see as being related to the sustainability of the organization. Now, what we typically start by doing is saying, okay, well, let's talk about climate change and global warming as two separate things. And health and wellness can be ecosystem health and wellness as well as the health and wellness of people. These are sort of outcomes that we want to affect, the changing and reducing, mitigating, adapting to, adjusting these outcomes. And this is where we measure success in these areas. And then it's all of these other things: water, food, landscape, materials, waste, energy, transportation. These are the services that we need to deliver to people in the buildings that we build, in the infrastructure that we build. And through these different services and these different, and they also have their own unique areas of impact, we may have an impact through our actions and our choices on these broader goals, of which we typically see from our clients now some significant focus on health, especially for people, and some significant focus on climate change. So I'm not going to go through all of the discussion, but hopefully it's also clear to everyone that climate change has a significant impact on health and wellness of people, as it's been clear from Anna and Jan's discussion so far. There's a significant impact associated. What we try and do with our projects is sort of map out for our clients the relationship between those actions that they need to take in these different areas for their facility or project or whatever, and then how they relate to actions they can take. So you can see this is sort of an example of the space of things that they need to consider, the examples of the things that you proposed, some of the issues that might come up, and the responses that are needed. I guess what I'm focusing on today is the ones in this corner here. So as we notice the impact on health and wellness, especially in extreme weather events, how does that affect the design of our energy systems, especially, or water? And I'm not actually going to talk about adapting to warmer temperatures as much as some of the emergency conditions that come up, because I think that's a more interesting and infrastructure intensive decision that we make. But I'll just note that, as it's been discussed, planning for a warmer future is something that we include in the analysis that we do. So we will analyze both current day weather conditions and future weather conditions to help our clients make the right technology choices and to size things appropriately. And what we find is that the impact is an increase in equipment size, and that's pretty important to recognize. What we're trying to do, though, is not just analyze the impacts on adaptation, but also to choose actions from the set of concerns that apply both to climate adaptation and global warming mitigation. And that's the way we like to have a discussion with our clients. I'm going to touch a little bit on these aspects of the presentation and work that we did with our clients and how we help them make decisions in these different areas, especially on the way that facility energy use and renewable generation affect both the emergency conditions that they have to address and also how the impacts that they have on climate change. So one of these, what we try and do is we take these sort of broad concepts and we work with people like Anna and Jan and others, and we do research within the LIT, and we try and answer the question, what are the metrics? What are the things that we can measure in a building that allow us to understand in a more precise way and maybe use modeling and more detailed analysis tools to give concrete answers on? And this is one of the concepts that's particularly relevant for a hospital that we call survivability. And really, it's just emergency condition preparation. So for this hospital project, we've defined these terms. I'm not sure they're universally accepted everywhere, but we like these two terms that we call active survivability, which means, we may not have energy and water available from the network, but we do have some services on site, and our goal is to say, how long can we last while still supporting near normal operation of the hospital? So that's called active survivability. Another is passive survivability. So what if at the site the energy and water is nearly depleted and there needs to be emergency operation? So what do? Well, we come up with some metrics that are useful things that we can measure and do analysis on to see what technology and other process choices help us to address these two things. So an example of an active impact metric is, what is the 72-hour backup requirement for electricity? And typically that's set in a peak condition in the summer, because that's when the largest electricity draw. And as things get warmer, that will be increasingly true, that the summer peak condition will likely dictate that. It's not true for every building, but for a hospital, certainly that's the case. The other side, on the passive impact, what is the 72-hour temperature change in a critical zones, the ones where people are, in the ICU, or if we don't have any power left and there's really, we're allowing, we're in a really emergency situation, how long, what temperature can we, or how are we protecting the people in those spaces from the space becoming too cold? And so what we do is we take the systems within the space and we ask the question, which of these systems are most important to achieving, positive gains on both of these goals, but also what are the possible negative and positive impacts that come from making improvements to the enclosure, the ventilation system, lighting, computers, et cetera, the other systems within energy services that we know we need to deliver in order to operate the hospital normally. So I guess a question to you guys is, for a hospital building, what energy service is the most important to address active, passive survivability? What do you think matters the most? So see what you say. I'll leave people. Is it the ventilation systems where we can take the biggest action and have the biggest impact? Is it the enclosure? Is it the computer systems or the lighting? Of these four options, I guess, is the question. I'll just leave, maybe I'll wait till the count gets to about 50, and I'll keep going. So one of the cool things about this job, and I really enjoy, is that, what's true for a hospital is not true for other facility types. And there's a lot of, site-specific, project-specific, owner-specific decision-making to do. Just like every building project is unique in many ways, so too is the sustainability planning for that organization. So I think you actually have it quite right so far. So good responses. The collective wisdom has actually gotten the answer pretty close. So good work. I'll just move on to the next one. So I'll kind of go through some of the things that we think through. Oh, do I just press the? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so ventilation definitely is important. So ventilation systems both help us, improving the ventilation system, reducing the need for ventilation really helps on both sides of the problem. The lighting systems can actually have they definitely reduce the backup requirement if we reduce lighting energy. But if we reduce lighting energy, we also increase the amount of heat that needs to be delivered to a space. So there's a potentially interacting problem there. On the enclosure side, it has way more in a hospital to do with the 72-hour emergency requirement for temperature than it has to do with the backup requirements, because so much of the load is driven by ventilation. Although there is a situation where we're worried about the backup being about solar gains, where we do have to think about and look at the solar gains that are coming to a space. So that's why there's a dotted line. It is important and could be critical. And computers have a similar relationship. So we want to reduce those loads as much as possible, looking for opportunities to use batteries or to store energy during backup periods. But computers can also be both bad and good, in the same way that lighting, they could have an impact. But if we store computers centrally, we can actually allow them to support the need for simultaneous heating and cooling in the building, and that could actually help potentially to reduce that 72-hour response. So it's interesting how mixed it is. And what we find is that we need to convert, we can't make individual decisions across the systems. We need to use energy modeling and other tools to analyze a variety of metrics, we call these sort of middle metrics for analysis. So the energy use intensity of a building by its fuel use, and also the thermal energy demand of the building for both heating and cooling. And these metrics aggregate the impact over the whole year. And that's actually how we also translate an analysis on maybe some of these sort of critical 72-hour issues are about emergency response, but the thermal energy demand and the energy use intensity also help us to connect to those bigger decision-making tools, which we find our clients are a lot more focused, especially for energy systems, on what is the cost of these solutions, and what is the payback of improving energy efficiency, and also what are the greenhouse gas emissions impacts. So the problem in some markets is that the decision making for these things is a bit conflicting. So you can see that what might cost a lot, which is electricity, might not have the biggest greenhouse gas impact in terms of reductions, the potential. It depends a lot on the location, but this is another aspect of the complexity of the decision making that we need to include in our analysis. So we don't just make decisions about electricity or gas, but also focusing on both so we can provide an optimal life cycle cost effective decision. Two other things that I want to bring up are the idea of demand management and zero carbon. These are things that we find are in balance as well, depending on the technology. So demand management is about reducing the need for, or even completely replacing, i.e. being part of backup systems for energy sources. Typically, clients are trying to use demand management to save on cost, but it could also be about greenhouse gas emissions or other more emergency goals. And then the zero carbon balance is a new and important discussion that we have going on with our clients about how can they get to or pursue zero carbon by generating enough on-site or maybe procuring off-site renewable energy to offset their operational emissions. So I won't do a poll about this one just for time, but what we find is that there are great technologies that do allow us to address these two problems simultaneously, as well as overall reducing emissions. Occupant sensing control is a good example from this project. Photovoltaics are also important, although they do have a minimal benefit to demand response, unless of course we use battery storage, which is really important. One of the challenging technologies that we often get asked about or is already in the thought process for our clients is combined heat and power. If you use natural gas to generate that combined heat and power, depending on the location, it could be really good, but it could also be a problem when it comes to carbon emissions, maybe erasing other efforts. One approach that we've definitely seen that is worthwhile is using geoexchange and biomass combined heat and power as a good package of options that can achieve significant success on both sides, as well as overall reducing emissions through improved efficiency. It's exciting to look at all these technologies and to combine all of these different metrics so that the client can really quantify these things. And we use the modeling and analysis work that we do to give them an answer that again, they trust, because it's thorough and thought through from a variety of perspectives. Okay, so here's a new foray that I want to introduce you to, is becoming a much bigger part of our approach, and also thinking about in the next 30 years what the impacts are. So how much of a hospital's annual emissions do you think are embodied in the material choices? So not in the operations of the building, over the next 30 years, but as you decide how much of that building, as you build that building and you choose different materials, how much of that is embodied? How much carbon is going to be released by the manufacturing process? I see, I feel like you're thinking through it really well. It looks like people are avoiding 10%. I think that's a pretty obvious. If you probably could have taken a clue from the shape of my graphics from the earlier part of the presentation, where the size of the balls for the different aspects were related to the importance of the impact. Okay, that's great. I think I'll probably move on. Looks like the majority are bracketing 50%. There's a little more on the 30 side. So, and you're actually, if we average it all out, you're actually really close to the answer. So I'll just go click on the button. So what's cool is that this work hasn't really been done in a lot of places yet, and people are starting to ask and recognize the importance of this upfront emissions question. In the UK, they've been doing it for a while to analyze their National Health Service, and you can see here, the purple are the quote unquote embodied impacts, either through construction, which is fairly low, but from procurement, the fast and slow moving goods that are constantly cycling through a hospital on a daily basis. And you guessed it right, that these fast and slow moving goods make a huge difference on the overall carbon emissions. The question is, who is responsible for those emissions? Is it the hospital that has to make the right choice, or is it someone upstream that should be changing their approach? Or obviously, is it probably better to have both the hospital and the upstream providers working together to see those reductions? But anyway, this is an important area of focus, and we're starting to really grow our service in this area. There's a good WSP national effort to try and address LCA in a variety of ways, or sorry, global effort to address LCA in a variety of ways. The other thing that's also really exciting, and I just wanted to share this with you as my last thought, there is a great potential for sequestration, especially in a country like Canada, where we have a growing forestry industry, and we can turn those forestry and other agricultural products into sequestered emissions. So what this graph shows, pretty exciting actually and controversial results, is that for this single family home where they use electric heat pumps to provide energy, the worst case here on the far left, well, I guess the worst case is the second bar from the right. The emissions associated with embodied impacts in red far outweigh those of energy use over the 30-year period, but the same sequestration of emissions can have a similar, not the same amount as the worst case, but really an effective sequestration potential as you compare it to the typical case. It's this kind of consulting, this finding of bio-based materials that help us do sequestration in our buildings that is going to be an important focus for the industry in the next few years. I'm fairly sure. So, okay, now I know this isn't exactly related to my my talk, but I'm curious about, especially since we're in election period, what people would prefer that our national reduction target be. And let's assume for this poll that your response implies that we will commit to actually achieving this target and take significant action per the target to address emissions reduction. So you can see the options here are 30% reduction, which is the current established target, 45, and I would say 45 to 50, which is what's needed to have a 50% chance of staying below 1.5 degrees, or the 60% target, which is what sort of roughly stated as being needed to get to a 2/3 chance of staying below 1.5 degrees? Or should we not bother setting targets? Maybe because you don't care or you don't think targets are effective, we should just allow for organic transformation of the industry. So I'm not seeing, or is it hidden right now that when you press the button, then we'll see the answer? Because I see the numbers going up, but I don't actually see the graph. So I'm not sure if everyone else sees it. But...
Yes, it's hidden.
Oh, it's hidden. Okay, so
You'll have to reveal the winner.
No one can use other people's opinions to make a decision on what they think. And I think there are about 60 people, right? So if I wait till it goes over 60, should be close. I hope that everyone, personally, and a lot of people I know are having a real important conversation about the relationship between what we're willing to do in our society and what's needed to address global warming. And I hope that you're having that conversation with your family over the next week, or you've had it already and you've already voted, which is great. So it's important for sure, no question. Not only to society, but also to WSP's business. So, okay, well, I think we're close now. Yeah, you want to hit it, Jamie? That's good, yeah. Oh, well, imagine that. Wow, that's impressive. So a 60% target has won. I'm sure there was a variety of responses, but it's good to see that. I think it's good to see that people want to really set a strong commitment. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Anthony. Our next presenter will actually be me providing a short summary. I'm just going to advance this slide here. So I'll be providing a short summary of Francois Grou's presentation. Francois is, as mentioned, is a hydrological specialist, and his presentation, which will be given in full tomorrow during our French session from noon until 1 p.m. in Eastern Standard Time, will be exploring really the cascading effects of warmer temperatures as they move into and alter the hydrological cycles. So just to provide a brief summary, which you could tune into tomorrow during the French session. Alternatively, Francois will be giving an in-person summary today at our 3 p.m. session, or he is, of course, available through email. So you could reach out to him if you have follow-up questions. But in his presentation, Francois will discuss both the direct effects that are related to warmer temperatures, so things like mild spells and the increase in precipitation because warmer air holds more water, as well as the realities that winters, as temperatures warm, will be shorter but wetter. So he will be outlining the direct effects of warmer temperatures on hydrological cycles, but also the indirect effects, which often materialize or transpire as things like flash floods and winter floods and ice jams. So we will start to see what have historically been unusual types of floods occurring more often due to the large extremes in warmer temperatures. So under warmer temperatures, these floods that we're expecting could be more severe, but also different. And that's why there's really a big call for adaptation efforts in how we design solutions, transportation modes, and the built form. And Francois will outline why probably most of us across the business, despite or regardless of whichever business line we're part of, could be included in a flood mitigation project in the next few years or even the next few months. So Francois's commentary for the keys to success include, firstly, a call to stay really well informed regarding the trends so that we're able to make good decisions about adaptation options. There are many publications out there, including federal websites such as www.climatedata.ca or climateatlas.com, which is hosted by the Prairie Climate Atlas, as well as regional climate associations like Oranos. And those are available to provide relevant data for making these kinds of analyses or tracking trends so that we can incorporate a future that we can see clearly into our designs and solutions. The next point that Francois will argue, I guess, will be that we need to communicate. So all of these kind of adaptations as we work across complex systems will require highly multidisciplinary approaches. And so there's lots to share from one business line to another. And there's also a lot to share with clients and lots of new ways to reach new clients. So he'd like to draw attention to the example of Gilles Wiseman, who took a lead in Quebec to join a bunch of business lines around the same table to talk about flood resilience. And he will outline what they discovered and really what they could do together, which was more than what they could do apart. And he will conclude his presentation really arguing for the need to be creative and developing new approaches when existing ones don't seem appropriate, and making a call for everybody to think outside the box. So if you are able to either reach out to Francois or put some questions forward in our upcoming slide asking if you have any questions, we can forward those to Francois, or you can join us tomorrow in the French session. So to wrap things up, we do have time for some questions. So if you have any questions coming through, if you have any questions, you're welcome to enter them into menti.com. Not sure why it's showing up as all of the answers to our previous questions. But if you do have any questions, feel free to enter them in at menti.com, or you can always email us at futureready.canada@wsp.com, and we can ensure that those will be answered in our follow-ups, where we will go through all of the questions that are asked and pose those to the presenters and post answers to those questions along with a recording of this webinar on our Future Ready intranet page. Additionally, the live posting will be announced as an intranet article and story. So I'm just going to see if I can troubleshoot why this would be not taking questions as we anticipated. And I apologize. There we go. We've rolled into some questions now. So my first question that I will outline, or that will come up for, I guess, Anna and Jan, was along the lines of how we could have heating and cooling centers could assist in adaptation to rising temperatures. Is that something that is a well-practiced practice across Canada?
Yeah, so if Jan doesn't mind me starting this.
Yeah, sure.
So when we're looking at it, this is in terms of especially human health. So people who tend to be most affected during heat waves often tend to be the most vulnerable members of society, and often they're people who are either quite poor or homeless. They're the ones who see the highest levels of deaths and the highest levels of hospitalization, or poor elderly who don't have air conditioning. So opening heat centers is for them to just have a place to be able to cool off during the day and not be exposed to constant heat. And this has been pretty beneficial. Quite a few municipalities around Canada do it. Some of them have temperatures. So if it hits 30 degrees Celsius, they'll open up libraries and they'll open up community centers to anyone just to be able to cool down a little bit. I thought I saw a little bit more to the question, but it's going up
There
and down the
was
screen.
more that I'm trying to track here, but the question I think also touched on the adaptation side of cooling centers. I guess when you put a cooling center in place, you're providing cooling, but you're also releasing some greenhouse gases. And I think this question could also be posed to Anthony as well,
Yeah, I
as
would just
if there are any
yeah,
strategies for balancing that, providing cool conditions while also mitigating the release of greenhouse gases.
Yeah, and I think I sort of touched on that, and I guess I probably could have spent a lot more time in the presentation talking about the way we design for warmer temperatures and support the design. But yeah, so one of the things is, in a green building project, an energy efficient building project, we want to think about how energy is going to be used for cooling, especially in the future. So we look at two kinds of scenarios. We'll look at the modern day energy use scenario, and then we'll look at an extreme weather scenario, and that will affect how we make decisions about, how whether to put shading in to a building, how to improve, because shading is one of those big contributors to reducing cooling load, for example, or whether we choose a geo-exchange heat pump system that, maybe the balance of heating and cooling wasn't good enough to make it cost effective, but when we look at the future, we notice that that balance is now more in sync, and so it makes more sense to warrant a geo-exchange approach. I think another important question is that if we don't act to mitigate impacts, it will also really affect the amount that heat that the temperature goes up. So I feel like there's all that interplay in there too, which is maybe part of the question, but yeah, so we try and do that. That's kind of the whole purpose of our service, and is to help think about that broad set of questions. So
Fantastic, thank
I'd
you.
also, sorry, if I could just add one quick thing.
Absolutely.
Just when we say heating centers, often, not to miscommunicate, it's not that we're opening up an entire new building that we're going to be air conditioned. It's existing places that are already air conditioned that maybe aren't necessarily opened up for long-term public use. So if you're looking at a community center, you might not necessarily be allowed to loiter in the lobby during the day, or there might not be chairs and desks and things like that set up for people to spend the day there. So it's not necessarily opening an entire new source of emissions, an entire new building. It's just adjusting your existing property so that people can have access to it.
Excellent commentary on both the operational side and the people side of things. One question that I did see scroll through also, which might be best directed at either Jan or Anna again, would be, why is Canada warming up at twice the global rate and the Arctic being 3 times the global rate? Could you give, in the last 2 minutes, a quick breakdown on why Canada really is being faced with warming temperatures?
Yeah, of course. If you don't mind, Anna, I can answer that. It's actually mainly because of a phenomenon called the polar amplification of temperature rise, and Canada is located like both in mid and high latitudes, and like one important pattern of climate change is that poles are warming more than the global average because of a phenomenon due to the ice melting, and when the ice melts, it gives like a positive feedback of temperature rise, because when temperature is rising, ice is melting, and the albedo, so like the reflection ratio of the surface of the Earth is going lower, is going to decrease, so more heat is absorbed in the atmosphere and in the ocean, and like it gives the opportunity to the temperature to rise even more, and you have like a loop effect between the temperature increase and the sea ice melting that like goes and leads to this polar amplification. Sorry. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think we've got some questions coming in, or we've had some questions come in on the ecological and climate science side of things, as well as the buildings responses and adaptation, as well as mitigation. So please do continue to write in with your questions, and we will ensure that we answer as many of them as we can, and probably all of them, and post those on our intranet page. But I am going to wrap up this session for now. So thank you very much for joining us, our presenters, as well as our attendees, and participating and engaging in the Menti questions on both sides. And we look forward to seeing you at our next Innovation Lab before the winter break. Thank you.